Okay, I'm placing an order to sell euro at 118752. And not yet. See? It wasn't like, yep, it's still, I still hold order, get executed. Come on. Okay, position opened, short on euro at 118752.
Mood all week long with the expectations for a divided government with a President Joe Biden in the White House. Well, there's historical precedent for this. If you look at annualized returns for the S&P 500 in different scenarios, whether it be a divided government, a blue wave, or a red wave, your best performance over history has come under a divided government scenario, 12.5%, under a blue wave, 11.8%, under a red wave with Republicans, 7.8%. But still, these are all very large annualized returns. Still, really the message being that stocks tend to rise. But what about on a sector basis? I'll kick it off with financials. Morgan Stanley actually says that a divided government for banks, well, this is going to be a good scenario for them, likely because we will not get possibly that tax hike from a Joe Biden presidency of 28%. That was really going to eat into banks' EPS. That would be a boon to a financial sector that is still down this year heavily, the worst performing sector, only second to energy. BI also points out the fact that healthcare might also be a beneficiary, the best performing sector this week, actually, even ahead of tech. But what about on a global basis? We were just discussing this with Rick Reeder. The idea is that we might see this be a good outcome for emerging markets in particular, also the Asia-Pacific region. And we have seen that being priced in throughout the week. If you look at the MSCI Asia-Pacific Index, now up 50% from its March bottom and really knocking on the door of that 2018 record high, John.
Sarah Ponzek, thank you very much. My colleague, good friend Josh Wingrove down in D.C., putting out a tweet in the last moment, a statement from the Trump campaign, which reads, "The election is not over." Let me just read the starting paragraph out to you. "This election is not over. The false projection of Joe Biden as the winner is based on results in 4 states that are far from final." Let's be clear, right now, no projection that Joe Biden is the winner from this network or the Associated Press. Right now, all we know is that in the last hour, the former Vice President Joe Biden has taken a narrow nominal lead in the race in Pennsylvania that would get him over the line. It would get him over 270. As far as we know, the counting continues, and we will respect that as the counting continues. I want to turn to Anastasia Amoroso now of JP Morgan Private Bank. Anastasia, great to catch up with you. I guess my first question is your reaction, please, to the news of the last hour, the developments, rather, of the last 60 minutes.
Well, Jonathan, I think it is a fair conclusion to make that it is too soon to tell. It is too close to call, and this is definitely not a done election just yet. I do think that either way, this is going to be a government that is divided, that is gridlocked, and that's been the main driver of the price action that we've seen in the markets. I don't think that changes, based on the news of the last hour either. And you might ask, why is gridlock such a good thing for the markets? Well, that means if we don't have a sweep one way or another, we can't expect sweeping legislative changes. So that means we're not going to get the healthcare pricing reform that would be negative for healthcare, and that's why it's one of the top performing sectors this week. It means we're likely not going to get large tech regulation, and that's why tech has fared well. And probably the biggie is the fact that we're likely not going to get the rollback of the tax cuts under the Trump administration. So all of that is what's positive for the market. And again, it's an election that's too close to call, but either way, it seems like it's going to be a very balanced government without any sort of meaningful majority. So it's just not going to get some of these reforms pushed through.
Anastasia, just to be clear, a month ago, if someone came on this program, they would have said gridlock bad, not gridlock good, because we wouldn't get the fiscal plan. Is that a change just on what the price is doing, or is there a part of the market that you prefer because we have gridlock relative to what you would have liked if we didn't?
Yeah, I think that's human nature, is to say, oh, I'm not going to get this, or I'm going to get this, and I'm going to be fearful. But the reality is you're going to have, this is checks and balances. And the fact of the matter is, yes, we're not going to get a large fiscal stimulus package, which honestly was always a long shot, whether it's on the infrastructure side, whether it's on the large phase 4 package. So that was, that was the first what you don't get. But the fact that you also don't get some of the negatives that might have come with a sweep, I think that's what the markets are really focusing on. And so first of all, this is good for the broader markets because tech and healthcare represents more than 40% of the market cap there. But second of all, looking under the surface, I think it is creating some interesting investment opportunities. So just in the last couple of days, the knee-jerk reaction of the market on Wednesday after the election was to sell clean energy.
I'm placing a stop on profit for euro at 118.732. Okay, stop placed.
Healthcare, and especially the diagnostic side and parts of tech, they all stand to benefit in this gridlocked environment.
Anastasia, this is important. It's the difference between a squeeze and a durable trend, something thematic, which is what you focus on. So healthcare, clean energy, is there anything else outside of those two sectors right now, Anastasia?
I mean, the three top ideas that we've had and we're likely going to have for the next, 3 to 5 years is anything to do with digital transformation. And I think it has played out a lot in the large cap, mega cap names, but I think there's interesting opportunities in this mid cap space. And some of the companies that are doing AI, some of the companies that are doing data privacy, some of the companies that are developing the killer app for 5G, these are going to be some of your smaller down the market cap names. I think those are still interesting, and they're not trading at the same valuations as some of the pure play cloud names. Within healthcare, healthcare innovation is not new per se, but what's new about it is the speed of innovation that we're seeing. And I think the underappreciated opportunity in healthcare may actually be on the diagnostic side. It's regardless of who's in the White House, who's in Congress, we're going to roll out more and more testing. And diagnostics is actually the highest volume activity in the United States. So that's a big opportunity there. And once again, I will emphasize clean energy and electric vehicles. It doesn't matter who is in the White House because we actually added more renewable capacity under President Trump than we did in the 6 years under President Obama. And the reason for that is economics. If we do end up with a President Biden, but no Democratic majority in Congress, guess what? There's still executive action that can be taken on clean energy and climate agreements. So I think that's why you're seeing the recovery in those clean energy shares. Anastasia,
great to catch up. As always, what a morning for it. Keep saying that. Anastasia Amoroso there of JP Morgan. About 10 minutes into this session, equities are lower, down by 0.6%. Energy leading up 0.4%, lagging this morning. Information technology after a huge rally over the last week. A huge rally in the face of a really close election. A development in the last 60 minutes that the former Vice President Joe Biden has just got his nose in front in Pennsylvania, which would give him, which we're not calling, it would give him, if he carries on getting that count, in his favor, 20 electoral college votes. That's the story out of Pennsylvania. Here's the story out of the Trump campaign. The line is simple, it's short. This election is not over. Let's head back down to D.C. and catch up with Bloomberg's Kevin Cerruti. Kevin, loud and clear, this election for them is not over.
Precisely. Matt Morgan, President Trump's 2020 campaign general counsel, just within the last couple of minutes, it's out on the Bloomberg terminal, putting out this statement. The election is not over. The false projection of Joe Biden as the winner is based on results in 4 states that are far from final. They then go on to list the states. Georgia, they say, headed for a recount. They're alleging that ballots were improperly harvested. Still, no evidence presented. In Pennsylvania, they cite many irregularities in Pennsylvania, including having election officials prevent our volunteer legal observers from having meaningful access to vote counting locations. There was a judge that yesterday ruled in favor of the president's campaign with regards to poll watchers. I do want to note Senator Pat Toomey, a Republican from Pennsylvania, said to NBC News earlier today that the president's comments yesterday in the White House were, quote unquote, hard to watch. Going through this statement, they went on to say in Nevada, Nevada, there appear to be thousands of individuals who improperly cast mail ballots. Again, Jonathan, no evidence presented from the president's campaign. And then finally, they go on in this statement to say that the president is on course to win Arizona outright, despite the irresponsible and erroneous calling of the state by Fox News and the AP. There are just, I'm following along in the Bloomberg terminal, about 200,000 ballots left to be processed in Maricopa County, according to Maricopa County, Arizona election officials. That's where things stand right now. The bottom line, top line view, the Trump campaign putting out a statement from their general counsel, Matt Morgan, saying that this election is far from over, and they are once again, predicting that they will be victorious once it's over.
Well, you've got to let the count continue, but at some point a broadcaster will come out and make a call. We're not making the call. The Associated Press aren't making the call. Just work with me through the numbers, Kevin, just briefly. Let's keep this really simple. The bottom of our screen right now, when we look at the votes and the Electoral College tally, we're at 264 for Vice President Joe Biden. That's because...
Okay, I'm moving my profit, stop on profit, to 118,702. Okay. No, right now I can move my profit to 118,652. Okay. Okay, it's nice. It will give me nice 1,000 pounds in profit if it will execute this price. Okay.
If a broadcaster does call this race, how do you expect the campaign to respond to that based on what you're hearing?
Well, two things. First and foremost, from a chronological standpoint, we are anticipating further developments from Maricopa County with the 200,000 votes that are still left to be counted, as well as Clark County, Nevada, over the next 24 to 48 hours, as well as an additional 30,000 or so votes, at least, excluding the mail-in ballots, to be counted in Pennsylvania. Recounts votes in the United States typically take days to weeks for a process. So Georgia headed for a recount. As you correctly point out, that electoral vote might not matter, but that electoral process will at least take a week. Secondly, and I've been communicating all the past half hour with members of Congress in the Republican Party on, and what they're saying based upon my reporting is essentially they're questioning what the path forward is for President Trump based upon the lack of evidence at this time that has been presented publicly as well as privately behind the scenes. They are raising the question of what is the path forward for the Republican Party as a whole if this continues onward in the longer term. Again, in just the last couple of minutes, Senator Susan Collins, who won a very tough re-election fight just the other night, put out a statement on the record and said, quote, "Every valid vote under a state's law should be counted. Allegations of irregularities can be adjudicated by the courts. We must all respect the outcome of elections," end quote. I can tell you that that is a statement that matches Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, which has been measured, but also does not allude to any evidence that has not been presented at this time.
Kevin, thank you. I appreciate it. I think we all need to understand this process and how long it could go on for from here. Kevin, stay close. Don't go anywhere. Kevin Cirilli there down in Washington, D.C. as the counting continues. Let me be very clear on this. The Associated Press with Vice President Joe Biden at 264. The President, Donald Trump, far below that number at the moment. Arizona has been given by the Associated Press and Fox News for that matter to Vice President Joe Biden, which is putting him at 264. Otherwise, you'd have him down at 253. So Pennsylvania absolutely key with the 20 Electoral College votes that would get him over the line. We're not calling that state right now. The counting continues. We respect that process. And as those counts continue, it's clear that the momentum over the last day or so, as those countings, that voting has come through, that counting has come through, has tilted heavily towards Vice President Joe Biden. That's why he has the momentum in the counting so far. I want to get to the market desk and bring in Bloomberg Scarlett Fu for more on this market. Scarlett, what a week.
What a week, and let's talk about momentum in the equity market, because we entered the pre-market trade with a sense that the global equity rally was kind of running out of steam. It lost some momentum as we limped to the end of the week, but we had the better than expected jobs report, and as you've been talking about, the updates that suggest we may get a battleground state like Pennsylvania or Georgia called soon, and that could give Joe Biden 270 electoral votes, perhaps giving some sense of decisiveness to this continued election drama. So right now, you look at the major indexes, the NASDAQ performing the worst here because big tech is seen as defensive, and you know that those big tech companies, whether it's Apple, Amazon, Alphabet, Facebook, and Microsoft, make up the bulk of the NASDAQ 100, and they've been a big drag on the NASDAQ whenever you get the sense that perhaps there's going to be an economic recovery coming because of massive fiscal stimulus and a Joe Biden victory potentially with a blue wave. Now, when you look at the sectors for the week, it's notable that all 24 groups are higher, and not just higher, we're talking by a fairly large margin too. 3.6% gain is the gain of the worst performing group in the S&P 500. That's utilities. The best performing group, chip makers, up by 10%. When you look at the other asset classes, the dollar is somewhat weaker here, but it is down for a fourth straight day. So that just gives you a sense of the kinds of weakness, the extent of weakness that we've seen with the dollar. 10-year yield moving up right now, up to 82 basis points. It's been a whipsaw week for the 10-year yield for treasuries overall. Not much movement in AGG, the ETF that tracks fixed income, and commodities, little change at the moment. We continue to monitor how things shake out with the vote count. John?
Scarlett Fu, thank you. We can turn to Bloomberg's Michael McKee on the latest in this race and the outlook for policy. Mike, haven't called the race, but people are talking about it already. What does policy look like in a Biden government, and for that matter, a divided government down in Washington, D.C.?
Well, I think you're going to see a lot less done than people anticipated, but it's not just what's going to happen once Joe Biden, if that's the case, takes the oath of office. It's what happens between now and then. Obviously, the legal wrangling may take up some of the time, but there's going to be pressure on the existing members of Congress to do something about the economy, with a lot of people still unemployed. And here's what I mean. Even though we had good jobs numbers today, you take a look at the total number of people who are on payrolls, and it's still 10 million below where we were in February. 142 million, we were up at 152 million. That means there are 10 million people who are not getting paychecks, and families who are not, who are at least struggling to get by. Plus, we have evictions starting to rise around the country. So there are still problems that need to be addressed. There's also the issue of what's happening with state and local government finances. State and local governments in this jobs report each lost 65,000 jobs. And the governors in those states have been predicting that we're going to see a lot of trouble. If that's the case, then you're going to see services cut back and a lot of pressure on members of Congress to do something. As for the Fed, probably not much they can do, but they will continue to say, as Jay Powell did yesterday, they're on the job.
Mike, great to catch up. Michael McKee there in New York. Mark Kiesel of PIMCO joins us right now, the Global Credit CIO. Mark, fantastic to catch up with you. What an hour of programming this has been for me, just to work through this market, try and understand the politics and what it means for asset classes worldwide. Mark, your base case now, how has that evolved in the last couple of days?
Hi, Jonathan. Good morning. Well, we're constructive on credit and equity markets. I think, markets want resolution. We're getting closer to that. I think the election showed that we're not going to have a blue wave. The prospect of a potential Biden presidency with a split Congress, even if it goes 50-50, it doesn't look like we'll have a huge mandate. And so I think that's good for markets like certainty. But in addition to fiscal, which probably comes maybe less than what we would have thought, the Fed has got that backstop in place. Monetary policy around the world is supportive. And I think also markets like the prospect of less taxation, less regulation. So this is, I think, actually pretty good for markets.
So, Mark, let's talk about whether that would pull investors or should pull investors away from the follow the Fed strategy that so many have got in behind over the last 9 months. Does that give you confidence to move away from that?
Well, I think longer term, Jonathan, if you look out 3, 6 months, and even past 6 months, a vaccine is probably coming, not just across the U.S., but Europe, the UK. The U.S. economy is healing. We saw that in the labor market data today. We still have 10 million jobs to go, but we're recovering. You look at Asia, that economy is recovering. So I actually think there's quite a lot of opportunity out there in sectors like travel and tourism, where there is a lot of pent-up demand. The low rates are likely going to stay here for a lot longer, particularly without a blue wave, and that should continue to support housing, building materials. So there are sectors that I think have underperformed, like travel and tourism and aerospace, which actually could rebound pretty significantly over the next 6 to 12 months. And the catalyst really, Jonathan, is the vaccine.
So, Mark, we're playing with two different time frames here. In the here and now, the sector's doing well, as you point out, housing, materials, flying off the back of low rates. Then you've got the outlook. Have you been buying credits in travel, leisure, airlines? Have you been doing that, Mark?
So we have been tilting the portfolio overweight really since March and April. We got a huge widening in spreads, and we capitalized on that. Originally, we added a lot of the defensive sectors, like you suggest, technology, cable, towers, and also a lot of housing-related sectors. But across the summer, we did start to get more cyclical. We did start to add more travel and tourism exposure. We were comfortable with eventually a vaccine coming and the pent-up demand. But more importantly, when you look at these companies, Jonathan, these large-cap companies have built up significant liquidity cushions, and these central bank backstops around the world have been very significant in getting these companies to term out their debt and tap into $1.5 trillion of new issuance. So these companies' balance sheets, particularly the larger cap companies, are actually in a very good state. Many of these companies now have 18 to 44 months of liquidity. So if you believe that the backstop will be in place, the fiscal comes, and eventually you get a vaccine, some of these companies can actually do quite well.
Just quickly, Mark, you're not worried about what could happen and develop in the next couple of months in the United States around COVID cases, that maybe a lot of the fears from spring return again?
So, Jonathan, I think that's a real risk, and we're seeing that in Europe. But what we also are seeing is that governments are stepping up and doing the right thing. The UK not only increased QE, but the government came out and increased or extended the furlough, the unemployment benefits to the workforce through March. And I think we'll have to get through the election near term, but I think the government will do the right thing. I think we will get some fiscal support for the workforce, for a lot of these service sectors, for the governments. We are healing. We're healing slowly. Some of the sectors need support, but we're confident eventually we'll get that. And the Fed has really put in place one of the most powerful backstops we've seen for the corporate bond market. So those arguments with the vaccine argued for us to be constructive on risk over the next 6 months.
Mark, come back soon. Missed catching up with you. Mark Kiesel there of PIMCO on this credit market. On payrolls Friday morning, we've hardly talked about payrolls because of the moment we're in right now. Developing story, the last hour, a moment in Pennsylvania which gets the attention of everyone worldwide. Here's Bloomberg's Kevin Cirilli for more.
Yeah.
Hey, Kevin, what's the latest?
Three things. First and foremost, according to the election officials in PA, 5,500 vote lead for Joe Biden ahead of President Trump. Two, the president's campaign putting out a statement saying, quote, this election is not over, and predicting that they will be victorious when it is. Three, based upon reporting that I've done in the past hour, there's going to be a Republican House caucus call early afternoon, New York time, this afternoon. Speaking to members of Congress, they're questioning whether or not the president's legal path forward is going to work, and they're questioning the strategy, and they're critical of it increasingly behind the scenes. I'm going to be watching to see if that gets made public.
Kevin, just quickly, can you define this election is not over? What does that actually mean? Because when the counting is done, the counting is done.
It means they're going to the courts. Yeah, they're going to the courts.
Kevin Cirilli is going to stay on top of this story through the next couple of hours, alongside David Weston as well. At the top of the hour, Alex Steele Guy Johnson will pick up the programming. I want to run you through the price action about 25 minutes into the session, which we've barely touched on after a huge week of gains on the S&P 500. The biggest week of gains potentially since spring. Right now we're down 21 and off by 0.6%. On the NASDAQ, that's where the huge move has been through much of this week. Down 138 and negative a little more than 1 full percentage point. If we switch up the board and go cross-asset just briefly, huge bid came into the bond market on the prospect of divided government and maybe you don't get that big fiscal package. This morning, blowout payrolls reports sending yields higher by 6 basis points to 0.82%. That does it for this market. That does it for me. The coverage continues. The counting continues. The eyes of the world, not just on Washington, D.C., but right now, the eyes of the world on Pennsylvania. From London and New York this morning, good morning. This is Bloomberg.
Women leaders were actually better at controlling the deaths from COVID-19. Do you think out of this pandemic, we'll see more countries be willing to elect female leaders?
When we look at women leaders, we tend to project on them baggage that they shouldn't bear.
Women are given an opportunity when no one else wants to do the job.
Women had a very clear objective. They wanted to save lives.
The women leaders, if you look at their careers, have also built up a level of trust.
In fact, women have to be better at communication in order to be elected as leaders, whereas this doesn't hold true for men.
We need to get those sexist stereotypes out of our head and give women a fair run for leadership.
Trying to change the stereotypes about women is not only the business of women, but men have to be part of it.
Months after Hurricane Maria, Puerto Rico is still in peril. Huge swaths of the island are still without power, running water, or access to medical care. Experts estimate that it will take years before these services are restored.
As you can see, we closed position on euro at 118.652. We have £1,000 in profit.
Anticipated, and filling the gaps between an overextended public sector and a suffering populace falls on the private citizens. Robert Anderson is a Puerto Rico resident of 4 years.
The eye of the storm came in south of El Yunque, swept up towards San Juan and out to Arecibo. Everything on the right-hand side is what we call the dirty side of the storm.
This isn't his first time in a disaster zone. With a military and telecom background, Anderson worked on repairing damaged cell phone towers in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. Some might be tempted to label him a disaster capitalist, seeking lucrative government contracts for his expertise. But as Anderson finds himself in the middle of a humanitarian crisis, he and his associates are developing a variety of pro bono recovery projects that target the island's hardest hit areas.
I see two Puerto Ricos. We're here in San Juan. They have telecommunications restored. They may or may not have power, but basic services are in place. They're able to get food. They're able to buy things. They're surviving. And when you look outside of the San Juan area, you can go 15 minutes from here and find areas that are devastated. I'm working on the devastated side.
Today, he's put together a boots-on-the-ground mission to provide medical care to some of the island's